Good morning. Who's from Spain but not from the Basque Country? Bienvenido al norte. I arranged the weather for you people specially. Just wait 5 minutes. We have people here from Siberia. We have speakers from China, from Australia, from Brazil, from Canada, as well as most of the rest of Europe. So while most of you raised your hand there when I asked who was from Spain, it's actually a very international event, and I noticed from the badges lying in the front, the people who are not here yet, they're mostly the jet-lagged ones, and you will see them later. Given that we arranged this with only a couple of months' notice, I think it's a great first start. We already planned next year's event. You'll see the dates on the program there, 16th and 17th of June, because we've learned our lesson not to hold it on a Catholic holiday. So next year, hopefully, we'll outgrow this venue, and the following year we'll need a bigger venue. Okay, pragmatic, actionable, evidence-based guidance. It's our brand essence. It's what this company has stood for since 2008. And why we need the Kanban Maturity Model. For the last 2 years, Teodora Bozeva and I have been working on this, and today we're launching the 1.0 release after a 1-year beta program, and prior to that, 6 to 9 months of community preview. Why did we have to do that? Well, let's start off with this quote here. It is actually 2 years old now. I first used it in a keynote speech 2 years ago this month in the United States, but it's from an article in a UK journal. The UK wastes billions every year on failed Agile projects. There's a direct quote here. That was the headline. And here's the quote. More than half of CIOs think Agile methodology is now discredited, while 3/4 aren't prepared to defend it as a way of completing projects anymore. Additionally, half of CIOs think that Agile project processes are just an IT fad. That's pretty shocking. There is a massive misallocation of capital happening in the IT world. And quite a few of you work for financial institutions. You guys are the worst. You know the joke, they arrest the bank robber and they ask him, why does he rob banks? And his reply was, that's where the money is. I've sat in some of those meetings. I've sat across the table from the head of retail banking, and he looks at the CIO and he says, we need the new website. We need it faster. Just tell me what you need. How much money? How many more people? I'll get you the money. And where does he get the money? From the retail bank. It's stashed full of cash. And he just hands it to the IT department and they hire a whole bunch more people. The only smart CIOs I've run into have some kind of weird constraint. We worked with Raiffeisen Bank in Russia. And at the time, they had filled an entire tower block overlooking Gorky Park in central Moscow. And it was before the new Moscow city skyscrapers were completed. You could see them on the horizon. And the only reason that they had to figure out how to work smarter is because they could no longer stuff any more human beings into this building. So the CIO actually had to say to his colleagues, no, don't give me any more money. I don't know how to spend it. And that actually caused them to be smart. So one of the things that I've, as a business that we have been concerned with, and I personally have been concerned with, is this massive misallocation of capital. A pretty useless Agile coach in the United States working as a contractor earns over $300,000 per year. Just pause and let that sink in for a moment. We're not talking good, effective Agile, we're talking useless. They show up and they conduct a few ceremonies every morning and they go home feeling that they've achieved something. And they report practice adoption. And they make more than $300,000 US a year. And we know companies that have 40 or 50 of those people. There are financial institutions in London that have 40 or 50 of them, and they're paying them over 2,000 British pounds per day. Massive misallocation of capital because you've got lots of money, you're a bank, and you're not paying attention to how you're spending it. Now, these failures, like the ones that this article was pointing at, are usually defended by a litany of excuses. Our enterprise Agile transition would have produced meaningful results if only we had senior executive support. If only people didn't resist the changes. If only there was more trust. If only we had better KPIs. If only teams were willing to collaborate with each other more. If only we had more leadership. If only we had fewer dependencies. How many of these so far are resonating with you? Heard these around the office recently? If only customers were more responsive. If only we could prioritize better, we had better, finer-grained stories, we had direct access to customers, priorities didn't change so frequently, and planning wasn't so painful. If only we didn't measure the wrong things, we were organized differently, we had T-shaped people, whatever the heck that is, and we had true cross-functional teams, and we had capacity when we needed it. And I could go on. I've been doing this as a business now for more than 12 years, or about 12 years. And there's always some excuse for why we've spent a few million euros, pounds, dollars on very expensive people who hold ceremonies with small teams every day. And what do you have to show for it? Where is the business agility that everyone's been promising you? Right. But the Agile community has a solution for this. Let's get everyone together and hold a facilitated discussion. Because heck, we're good facilitators. And you can solve all the world's problems by getting people together and talking about it. How many of you really believe that? Yeah, the Agile coaches in the room have their hand up. If only facilitated discussions actually fixed any of these problems. And the problem is that there are people holding the discussions, they don't actually have any means to reason about the problem. They don't have the models, the framework, the language to discuss what's actually going wrong in their organizations. Because for a dozen years, they've just been doubling down on the same old stuff. It's not really making a difference. So, in our world, we believe in pragmatic, actionable, evidence-based guidance. Pragmatic, you can get it done. You don't need the chief executive's permission. One of the earliest Kanban implementations was at a company you might have heard of. They make laser printers. They're called Hewlett-Packard. They implemented Kanban at the laser printer division in Boise, Idaho in 2005 and 6, and they increased the productivity of the development on laser printers by 8 times. They reduced the lead time to produce a new revision of a laser printer from 21 months to 3.5 months. And the chief executive at the time was a lady called Carly Fiorino, and she didn't even know that any of that was going on. They didn't need anybody's permission because they had pragmatic advice. It was actionable. They knew what to do. And just a couple of middle managers, not doing anything special, just doing the job. They didn't have any extra budget. They didn't have any consultants. And my God, they certainly didn't have any Agile coaches. Just think about that for a moment. 21 months down to 3.5 months. An 8 times improvement in the productivity of an entire business unit. Now, some of you have been to business school, I imagine. I know that Carlos has. And there's a couple of very good ones. Just you want to just look across the river there. So, if you've been to business school, you don't need to know anything about Hewlett-Packard laser printer business. But just from what you know about business in general, if you reduce the time to make something from 21 months to 3.5 months, what does that do to the performance of your business? It revolutionizes it. And how important were laser printers to Hewlett-Packard in 2005? Their main cash cow business. The most important thing to make sure that they had money to spend on everything else. One of the most important business agility initiatives probably in the history of the planet, and there wasn't an Agile coach in sight. Think about that for a moment. All right, so we believe that there should be no wishful thinking. As soon as you find yourself saying, if only the chief executive had given us permission, you have wandered into the territory of wishful thinking. That's not pragmatism, it's wishful thinking. These are the words you need to listen for. If you hear them coming out of your mouth, you've already gone too far. You are making a mistake. You are spending money in a way that you shouldn't be. You need to stop and think about what can we get done with the constraints that we have. And if those constraints are that the chief executive isn't in the room, they haven't given us permission, we don't have a big budget to spend, well, that's fine. What can you do? Find something that makes a difference. And we have that advice, right? And people need to know what to do. They need to have models for understanding the world. Why do things take too long? Well, at Hewlett-Packard, they had something like 900 features in progress on these laser printers. And they came to the conclusion that was too many. And the right answer was about 90. So they had what I would describe as a difficult meeting. They called people into a room and they said, we have about 900 things in progress right now, and we need to cut that down to 90 before we leave the room today. 810 things have to wait until later, or we don't do them at all. Now, that's a non-trivial discussion, but we can teach you how to hold that discussion, how to think about what needs to happen now, what can wait until later, and if so, when, and what doesn't need to happen at all. There is language we can give you, models you can use to think about it. And they need to have the confidence that suggested actions will work. One of the largest reasons for inaction is fear. Fear that the actions aren't going to work. You need to help people get over that. They need to have a model that says, if we do this, we expect this outcome with a fairly high probability. And I would encourage you to stop reorganizing. The poster child for reorganization is a credit card company and bank in the United States called Capital One. 2 years ago, during our conference in the United States, which took place across the street from Capital One's headquarters, the people sitting in our audience from Capital One were reorganized twice during the conference. Typical Capital One employee reports having 5 different bosses in a single year. They're now on their 5th Enterprise Agile Transition Initiative. Anyone who calls themselves an Agile coach or consultant of any worth in the United States has been fired by Capital One already. Right, start where you are and evolve. That's our approach. It's pragmatic. We're not there. We walk into your organization and say, oh, you need to reorganize as cross-functional teams. Or even worse, there's a bank originally headquartered just along the coast here. They're not here today. You other local banks, BBVA, Kutscher Bank, you know who I'm talking about. And when they decided they had to be enterprise agile, someone advised them, you need to DevOps. And for them, that meant taking 4,500 people and 2 different businesses and a campus in Mönchengladbach in Germany and merging these 2 separate subsidiary businesses into one. And 2 and a bit years later, they're still working on that problem. And they haven't got round to doing anything about the enterprise agility thing yet. Meanwhile, if they hadn't bothered with any of that, so another situation, I was meeting with a vice president of a credit card company, the biggest, ugliest one. And this was in London. And he was a pragmatic Scottish bloke like me. And he was the head of their IT services group. And he was telling me that some consultants had been in the previous week and told them that if they want to be agile, they need to DevOps. And what that meant was that his 700-person business unit had to merge with the other 700 and something people business unit that did software development into one single 1,500-person business unit with only one vice president. That gave him a 50% chance of survival. And he didn't like that idea very much. So I talked to him for a while and I said, okay, so the problem here is that your development teams feel that your IT services group doesn't service them fast enough and predictably enough. And he said, yes. I said, okay, why don't we just fix that? Why don't we just make your IT services predictable and reliable and a bit faster? We know how to do that. Let's get started. Let's not bother trying to merge 2 700-plus person business units into one. Reorganization often isn't pragmatic. It isn't actionable unless, hey, the chief executive's in the room. It's unpopular. Who loves being reorged? New boss, new business unit, maybe a new job title. People don't like that. It gets resisted and it causes long delays. What's enterprise agile about wasting more than 2 years reorganizing your company before you even get started? No funky named organizational units. There's an internet radio music streaming service that loses $1 billion a year, and their organization model has become rather trendy because it's got all these funky named organizational units, and people think they should copy it. To which my response is, did you also copy their $1 billion a year losses? It just doesn't strike me as a sensible way to run your business. You're not a music streaming service, and you don't lose $1 billion a year. Start where you are now and figure out how to fix the problems that you've got in your organization. And how do you do that? You make managers responsible and accountable for the bits of the business they actually own. Make your managers earn their paychecks, rather than spend your money on fancy consultants and contractors who don't actually do anything other than facilitate a few meetings every day. Start where you are and encourage better alignment and collaboration between groups. Not first reorganize into pods, squads, chapters, flocks, herds, packs, or mobs. No new identities. No one gets a new role, responsibility, or job title. How about people keep the job title they've got and just actually do their jobs properly? It's very remarkable how that will fix your business. Not first send everyone on a 2-day training course and hope they come back changed because we forced a new job title upon them, especially if it is a new funky name that no one quite understands. Something to do with some sport they don't play. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. This is from Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline. Stop trying to change the people. Right? And that not just the individuals, the social groups. You reorganize a social group, you break up one group, and you put the people into beautiful cross-functional teams or squads, pods, mobs, whatever they're called. They don't like that, at least not for a while. And while they're not liking it, they're not productive. And you've made your business worse and not better. Forced identity change, while it's actionable, you send someone off for 2 days of training, you give them a new job title, and if they don't like it, well, heck, we can always advertise their position and fill it with someone else. It's likely to invoke passive-aggressive resistance. Now, when I worked for Motorola in their mobile phone division, about 17 years ago now, a programmer who worked for me posted a blog post. Now, he was actually what we might call the Agile lead in our organization at that time. And he was a fan of the changes I was making there. But his blog post was about his previous job and his previous manager. It articulated 22 ways that programmers can passively aggressively resist their manager's wishes without being caught. Because are they playing ping pong at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they've had a really tough, hard day and achieved a lot and they're exhausted? Or are they playing ping pong because they hate their pointy-haired boss and ping pong beats the heck out of working? And how would you know? And good old-fashioned management school advice, manage by walking around. So you walk around your IT department and there's a bunch of programmers in the corner playing ping pong. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? You have no way of knowing. So we need better, more pragmatic, actionable, evidence-based guidance. So what has the Kanban community had to say about this? Well, until recently, our really only decent advice was hire someone called with this professional credential called Kanban Coaching Professional, and we have a few in the room here. The KCPs in the room, stand up, please. And Peter Kirschbaumer, you're included. He's pretending. Okay, so there's a few of them, and some were shy and didn't want to stand up. Now, why was this good advice? Well, let me tell you, KCPs are capable of coaching a business unit, about 150 to 600 people, to a full Kanban implementation, enabling significant business agility. And one or two of the shy ones who didn't stand up have done this, but they haven't actually gone through the program and earned the little badge. KCPs can take a business unit to what we now call maturity level 3. That means that you have satisfied customers, that you're fit for purpose, that you meet your customers' expectations more or less all of the time, that you do things quickly, you do them with high quality, and you do them predictably. KCPs know how to drive an evolutionary change in an organization. They don't walk in and tell you to reorganize into pods, squads, mobs. They don't give people new job titles. They know how to start with what you do now and evolve from there. This little cartoon was commissioned for the cover of the Kanban book in 2009. And this shows the evolutionary change in action. We've got some visibility onto the process, the work that these people are doing, and you can tell from their conversation that it's not going so well. And then one of the team says, you know what, let's do something about that. So what we've got here is some stress. We've got some reflection mechanism, this meeting they're having in front of their board, and we've got an active leadership. And these are the three things you need for evolutionary change: a stressor, a reflection mechanism, and leadership. It's the magic formula. And we can train that. We can teach you how to put the stressors in the organization. Sometimes just a simple metric in a report, little chart put up on the wall, information radiator, that can be a stressor, particularly if it's got a target or an objective. Then you need a reflection mechanism, a way of talking about it. Why are things being delayed for so long? Let's talk about that. Let's look for root causes of delay and do something about them. Let's do something about it. Somebody needs to show the leadership. Now, in the Kanban method, we've codified a number of these stressors and a number of the reflection mechanisms. The reflection mechanisms are collectively known as the Kanban cadences. So these are prescriptive practices that come straight out of the book. So a coach's job is to come in and figure out where are you now and what's the appropriate stressor to add, the appropriate reflection mechanism to add, and then to gently kick someone in the ass and encourage them to show the leadership that's required. Steve McGee later on is going to talk about leadership, because you notice we have two beautiful arrows here for stressors and reflection mechanisms. We figured out we had to codify leadership so that we could train that, we could do leadership development. And we have that available now. That's a training class that we're offering from the second half of this year. And Steve's going to talk about a leadership model using Game of Thrones as the examples, because there's lots of both good and bad leadership in Game of Thrones. Right, KCPs understand identity and how it affects resistance to change. And they can recognize evolutionary leadership. This is Lou Gerstner. Shortly after he took over at IBM, IBM was in trouble. The mainframe business was in trouble. They were running out of money. They were less than 6 months away from being insolvent. IBM in 1992 was struggling to make its payroll. That's pretty shocking. And at the time, Gerstner was under pressure to break it up into different businesses and sell them off separately. And Thomas Watson Jr., the son of the founder, didn't want that to happen. And he persuaded Gerstner that it shouldn't happen. Gerstner gave a press conference and he famously said, the last thing IBM needs now is a new strategy. We're going to stick with what we do now and we're going to get better at it. And the rest is history. IBM's still one big company. Gerstner was there for 10 years. He successfully passed it on. Meanwhile, we talked about Hewlett-Packard. Here's Carly Fiorino. She was the CEO at that time in the middle of the last decade, and her strategy was to annex a small neighboring country called Compaq and declare victory. And Hewlett-Packard hasn't done so well since Carly Fiorino's time. We teach KCPs to understand what I call the V'ger concept. The V'ger, for the Star Trek fans in the room, you will all know, is the big baddie from the original Star Trek movie, with William Shatner as Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. And this is the V'ger, and they get right into the heart of it towards the end of the movie, and they discover this rusty old piece of space junk inside there. And they realize it's the Voyager space probe from 1997, and it's come back to Earth with a few upgrades. So what's at the heart of your business? Right? Microsoft, 1975, developer tools, their first product, BASIC. A BASIC interpreter for the Altair 80 computer, sold as an embedded chip inside the machine. Microsoft is a developer tools company. The head of Microsoft now is Satya Nadella. The business unit that he ran before he was promoted to chief executive was the developer tools division. If you want to understand Microsoft, you understand that what they do is developer tools. Everything else is peripheral to that. IBM in 1975, they're a mainframe manufacturer. Hewlett-Packard, an electronics company. They started with things like oscilloscopes. Motorola, it's not an accident they were in the mobile phone business. They invented the original walkie-talkie. They're a radio company. The Motley Fool's an American company. They're an investment. They started out as an investment newsletter. And Yahoo, until Marissa Mayer took over, Yahoo was originally a portal. And portals existed because search engines weren't good enough. And then search engines got good enough when Google arrived. And Yahoo turned into a zombie, the world's richest zombie. And it spent about 17 years as a zombie until Marissa Mayer came along and gave them a new identity. KCPs know how to describe culture and affect the sociology of an organization. There's a concept called social entropy. Now, what we have here is a room full of strangers. They don't know anybody. There is no social affinity here. There are no friendships. And in thermodynamics, we would describe this situation as having maximum entropy. It also has maximum optionality, because these people are free to form any social groups they like, if only they could get to know each other better. But the physicists in the room, any physicists here? One. There's always one. And we are, the engineering faculty. I did expect a physicist here. So we'll tell you that when you have maximum entropy in a closed system, the only way to fix that is to inject some energy. So we're going to do that now. And the energy is called Justin Bieber. And when Justin Bieber arrives in our space, some of these little quantum particles here, they get excited by the arrival of Justin Bieber. Oh, Justin, we love you. And they become the believers. They love Justin Bieber. Now, Alexei Zheglov and I, Alexei's talking tomorrow on Fit for Purpose, we wrote a book called Fit for Purpose. And in that book, there's half a chapter about Justin Bieber. And when we sent the chapter out to some people to review the manuscript, we discovered that there's a whole set of professional Canadian ladies who have an alter ego of Justin, of Belieber. They're Canadian mommies, and Justin Bieber's a nice-looking little Canadian boy. And they empathize with Justin Bieber's mommy, and they've got kids too, and they love Justin Bieber. And we get all this feedback like, oh, I think you're being too hard on our Justin. Maybe you could tone it down a bit. Meanwhile, the manuscript had gone out to a bunch of, I have to say, middle-aged white guys who looked a bit like me from other parts of the world, and we got back this vitriol. Why are you even talking about this Bieber little prick? I hate that guy. And that was mild. We discovered that the world is peppered full of middle-aged men who fucking hate that Bieber guy. So when you've got believers, everyone else is a non-believer until you discover there's the anti-believers. And this is all you need to know about sociology. It's all you need to know about global politics right now. This is how you polarize a society. As Justin Bieber amps up his good or bad behavior, depending on how you view that, it strengthens the believers. And it strengthens the anti-believers. And when the anti-believers appear in the market, when the believers realize the haters exist, what does that do to the sociology of the believers? It makes them stronger. It makes them tighter knit. They get defensive. And also it flips some of the non-believers who hate the anti-believers, so they become believers. The believers get bigger, and because the believers are getting bigger, the anti-believers gets bigger. This is what's happening in global politics right now in almost every country in Europe and Eastern Europe and North America. Politicians who understand how to manipulate this situation are polarizing society. This is some data from The Economist magazine about British members of Parliament voting on Brexit. Now, the Brexit people are the anti-believers, they're anti-EU, while the Remainers, as they're known, they are pro-EU, and they're mostly the Labour Party and the Scottish National Party. So they believe in the European Union, and look how closely knit they are. Meanwhile, look at the Brexit people. This is Theresa May, the outgoing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And down here somewhere we have Boris Johnson, Mr. Brexit. So the thing is, why are we where we're at? Because the anti-believers in this situation, they know what they're against. They don't know what they're for. The anti-movement is always weaker than the pro-movement. And that's why they can't get their Brexit shit together. Now, we're pro-European here, right? I run a business in Europe, I run one in the United States. But the reason I'm here, ultimately the reason I'm here is I had to be Brexit-proof. I needed to have a European passport. I needed a business based in Europe. I couldn't take the risk that these idiots would manage to pull this off. Even though I know something about sociology and the current situation was entirely predictable. Right, KCPs know more about sociology because we train this in class and we make them watch 5 movies so that they understand it properly, including Happy Feet, a very educational movie. Those of you with children will know what I mean. Right, we teach them about social capital, the level of trust in an organization, and social cohesion and social innovation. And we teach them about the levers that you can pull and adjust in order to change these things. And we teach them about cultural values. Because if your organization doesn't value the behavior you need in order to be more agile, you're not going to make progress. Now, a lot of leaders will say, well, how do we go about changing the culture? How do we go about introducing values like that? We know how to train that, and I think Steve will talk about it later on today. So we teach that to KCPs, and we teach them this, Ray Immelman's Tribal Behavior Assessment Framework. And this provides a model that says we're going to think about security of individuals and security of the tribe, and value. What he means there is self-esteem. How good do we feel about ourselves as individuals and as a tribe? And actually, the desired quadrant in the upper right is where the tribe feels a little insecure, but individuals feel secure. And the tribe feels a little undervalued, but the individuals feel valued. And really good leaders know how to manipulate a situation so that the